Hi, everyone. Just a quick note before we start today that live closed captioning and American Sign Language interpretation for JDAM programs is provided by a generous grant from Toyota. So welcome, everyone. My name is Shelley Kupfer, and I'm honored to be the chair of the Jewish Federations of North America's National Women's Philanthropy Board. The amazing work of the federations in supporting people with disabilities to enable them to thrive is one of the principal reasons I became involved in my local Jewish Federation of Greater Washington and in JFNA. My husband Jeff and I are the proud parents of 3 wonderful children, one of whom, Adam, is a young adult who has a developmental disability. I know the positive effect that a job can have on a person with a disability. For several years, Adam has worked at Capital Camps, an overnight camp serving Jewish youth from the DC area where we live. He will return this summer for his 5th year as a sports specialist, and he has worked part-time in the camp office while he was in school. I know Adam's job brings him great pride and is especially meaningful to him because he was a camper there for many years. However, beyond his pride, I know that the rest of the staff and campers at Capital Camps value Adam for who he is and for being a part of the camp community. This attitude holds true not just at camps, but across industries. Workers with disabilities make meaningful contributions to their employers, and hiring them is not a matter of charity, but a matter of good business. This important reality is the principal focus of today's session. As Adam grows older and looks for permanent employment, I know that he will be a great employee. However, I worry that the false assumptions society holds about the capabilities of people with disabilities will hinder his ability to get a job. Society must get to a point where we recognize the vast capabilities of employees with disabilities, a point where companies employing people with disabilities is commonplace. Our MC for today's discussion is my dear friend, Steve Rackett, president of the Genesis Prize Foundation. Steve has over 4 decades of experience as a Federation professional and can be proud of so much. As the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, he created a culture of inclusion and made disability inclusion a priority. He has so much to be proud of, and I will forever be indebted to Steve for highlighting the importance of inclusion in my community. I am so looking forward to today's discussion because I know together we can break attitudinal barriers and demonstrate that people with disabilities are tremendous assets to employers. So I'm handing it over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Shelley. It's great to see you again, and I appreciate that very, very kind introduction. If my parents were around to hear it, my dad would have been proud and mom would have probably believed it. And a thanks to Aaron Kaufman, to Rebecca Zuck-Sowers, and Jessica Balboni from JFNA, who've done all the heavy lifting with the session and for JDAM. I consider myself lucky. I'm healthy in this year of the pandemic. I'm happily married with 5 children and 5 grandchildren, all of whom are also healthy. I have a wonderful job, and I've had a long career in Jewish communal service, during which I've had the opportunity to lead organizations and help thousands of people locally and around the world. And oh yeah, I have a disability. Now that's a phrase I only started using recently. I was born with normal hearing, and in 1957, when I was 2 years old, you do the math, my mother called me one day out in the yard, and I didn't answer. Now, she wasn't totally shocked because my brother, who's 7 years older than me, had the same crazy thing happen to him. In any event, I developed a severe hearing loss and began a lifetime of wearing hearing aids, paying really close attention, and becoming an expert lip reader. I can tell what people are really saying when they go on mute during Zoom calls. I've overcompensated in so many ways, I've lost count. But I am lucky, and I know it. I've benefited from technology and a loving and dedicated mother who patiently taught me to speak. I'm also lucky because those who hired me over the years, including search committees that offered me the opportunity to be the CEO in 3 different federations, overlooked the fact that I have a disability. But that's not the case for far too many people. And that's why we're here today. The goals of our 7-hour session, which through the magic of Zoom will only appear to you to be 1 hour, are to dispel common myths around hiring people with disabilities, and to help you understand how a more diverse workforce benefits your organizations. To hear from an amazing panel of disability and inclusion advocates, and to give you some tools to start making changes in your organization and your hiring decisions. It's really fascinating to me and somewhat disheartening that it's been 30 years since the passage of the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA. And here we are, we're still talking about people with disabilities as if it's a subgroup over there. A subgroup that needs federal legal protection. A subgroup that requires a workshop and an entire month dedicated to Jewish disability and inclusion. But here we are. Some statistics. 1 in 4 adults in the US has some type of disability. 2 in 5 adults, 65 and over, have a disability. And only 33% of those with a disability participate in the US labor force, compared with 75% of those without a disability. And as Shelley alluded to, far too many employers believe the following 6 myths about hiring those with disabilities. Number 1, it requires expensive accommodations. Number 2, they miss too much work. Number 3, they're difficult to discipline and fire. Number 4, I'm probably going to get sued. Number 5, they can only do certain more menial types of jobs. And number 6, it makes the other employees uncomfortable. If we indeed had the full 7 hours for this session, we would debunk each and every one of these myths one by one. But here are 2 important responses. Nearly 60% of accommodation cost absolutely nothing, while the rest average around $500 for each person with a disability. And number 2, in fact, you can fire a person with disabilities if the employee does not meet legitimate job requirements, including performance or not meeting production standards, and if the termination is not related to the disability. I urge you to look up the rest of these myths for yourselves. There's data to prove each and every one of them dead wrong. There are moral, economic, legal, practical, and personal reasons why we should hire those with disabilities. For the Jewish community in particular, and for each of us dedicated to building stronger, more vibrant, and more inclusive communities, they come down to B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. If indeed we believe that the spark of the divine is omnipresent, then we strive to see God in everyone around us. We are enjoined in Leviticus not to curse the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. That's a negative commandment. The flip side, or the more positive commandment, is to extend a hand, include, welcome, and for the purposes of today's discussion, hire those with disabilities. And Shelley said earlier as well, it's not charity, it's good business. It changes culture and resonates far beyond the walls of your organization. And when your agency hires those with visible and invisible disabilities, it makes a powerful statement that you're walking the talk. I mentioned earlier that I only recently began defining myself as having a disability. After many years of downplaying my hearing loss, I realized that I had a responsibility to help change the way the Jewish community addresses disabilities. If I was willing to change the language I use to describe myself, then I had a responsibility to change communal language. If I was willing to take action with regard to this issue, then I have a responsibility to help our community take action. I hope you do as well. We've had some last minute changes in our panel. Both Jessica from Microsoft and Shaquana from Toyota live in Texas. And unfortunately, both are without power this morning. We hope that they and the millions of others impacted by the storm and the cold recover quickly. Let's meet our other panelists, each of whom will help us understand not only how, they help make changes in the organization, but even more importantly, why? Jeff Gentry holds a Master of Divinity degree and currently serves as the Disability Services Director at JVS Boston. In the past decade, Jeff and his teams have helped over 1,000 youth and adults with disabilities secure employment in the community. Alicia Petroff is a leader in diversity and inclusion and is currently Vice President, Talent Acquisition and Diversity and Inclusion and Employee Experience at the Hershey Company. And finally, Aaron Kaufman needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. For the past 5 years, Aaron has been with the DC office of the Jewish Federations of North America and is now the Senior Manager of Legislative Affairs. Before that, he was a lobbyist for ARC of Maryland on behalf of those with developmental disabilities. And as someone with cerebral palsy, Aaron brings a unique perspective on his role as an advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. So I think we have the rest of our panel on camera right now. So let me start with a question for you, Jeff, if I may. And you're the one who raised this in a conversation we had leading up to today. Randy Lewis is a former senior vice president at Walgreens. And he said that, quote, inclusion is the road to universal design. What did that mean? And how did that play out in the workplaces you deal with at Jewish Vocational Services in Boston?
So Randy is a hero of mine, and I know Alicia and other folks have mentioned his influence as well. Randy was involved with logistics at Walgreens and was really passionate about creating distribution centers that were fully inclusive for people with disabilities. And one of the things he mentioned was that as they created workstations and in some cases reframed job responsibilities around people's diverse abilities, and that could be as simple as having a station that could raise or lower depending on whether a person was of tall stature or short stature, that they found that those changes increased productivity and efficiencies for all workers. And I think that's really what he meant by inclusion leads to universal design. We can talk about hiring people with disabilities, and we absolutely should. But I think it's really important that we recognize that we already employ a lot of people with disabilities who, because of societal stigma or for other reasons, have not felt confident or invited to really bring their whole disabled, beautiful selves to work. And as we do that, as we recognize, like you mentioned, Steve, that most accommodations cost absolutely nothing, and the majority of the rest of them are less than a $500 investment. What we realize is that we're not only benefiting a target population, people with disabilities, but we're really becoming a more holistic and welcoming employer for all of our populations. And I really love, if I can just add one note, I really loved what people were talking about earlier, saying, we're not here to ask for charity jobs, we're here to make a business case. And I really think one of the key roads that we need to think about as we continue down that road is moving as a larger community from seeing disability as an impediment to seeing it as a part of identity and a part of something we're proud to be a part of, moving from impediment to pride. So I really appreciated you sharing that story, Steve, which I have a very similar story about moving towards pride in my own learning disability. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Alicia, it's been suggested that inspiration informed the ability and the willingness of companies to hire folks with disabilities. Did this apply to Hershey's? And if so, where does such inspiration come from? And how does it play out in the workplace?
Yeah, Steve, that's a great question. First, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And my heart goes out to everyone who's dealing with impact of the Arctic chill. I hope everyone is able to stay safe and stay warm. So for Hershey's journey around hiring individuals who identify as having a disability, you know, it really started for us in earnest in about 2011. And Randy Lewis was speaking at a supply chain conference with our top leaders in our supply chain. And Randy did something interesting. He went off script and he started talking about the work that Jeff just mentioned and his efforts to hire more individuals for Walgreens who have disabilities. And I have to tell you, the entire leadership team for our supply chain was really inspired and awestruck in that moment. And so why did Randy's message resonate? You know, I think for every organization, there's a set of credos that drive the behaviors and actions of every employee. And the Hershey Company has been founded on togetherness or inclusion. And we make products for consumers around the globe and of varying abilities. And so we always look to include as many people as we can in our business, because we know when we have more abilities, more diverse thoughts, different perspectives, our business is just better and we're able to innovate far easier. And so in that moment, as Randy was speaking, our leaders became really inspired and they said, we are going to figure this out in a wholesale way. Now, manufacturing environments can be very complicated. They are noisy. There can often be restrictive clothing. These environments have to be incredibly safe as well. And of course, you're talking about a lot of heavy machinery. And so it took a lot of visits with some Walgreens facilities and other businesses to understand how we could do this in a very safe way. But we have. And today it's really inspiring to note that many of our employees who identify as having a disability actually work in our manufacturing plants, which is a bit of an outlier for a Fortune 500 organization. And I know that happens because our employees really believe in including everyone. You know, what's really fascinating is when we look at our annual census survey results, we notice that the facilities with higher representation of individuals who identify as having a disability also have higher fulfillment and engagement scores. And so I think for us, it just goes back to reinforce, you know, we're all about inclusion. And for us, that means everyone. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the accommodations process. Those stats that you mentioned were really helpful. And we have a centralized accommodations budget. And we have very widely known practices. And we talk about accommodations early and often throughout the interview process. That is a budget that I love to overspend each and every year. And so we actively remind managers, we remind employees that accommodations are available. And we try to make it as easy as possible for people to think about that and to leverage those funds. So I think that's one tip that I wanted to talk about with the group.
Thank you. And you didn't tell me to say this, but I urge everyone to buy Hershey chocolate based on that.
Yeah.
So thank you. Erin, how has your experience as someone with a disability informed your career? And what was the catalyst for JFNA to focus on this issue? You're on mute, Erin.
Thank you. I was dreaming of Hershey's chocolate and forgot that I was on mute. So I'm more of a Reese's guy myself. But thank you, Steve. And I'm going to embarrass you when I say this, but it's true. Because I knew you had a disability and you've known me since my childhood, I looked at you and said, I too can be a Federation exec one day. So thank you for being there for me, Steve, in my youth. But to be honest with you, Steve, it's been a mixed experience being a worker with a disability, because while in 2021, everybody talks about wanting to have an inclusive workforce, at some organizations, it's malarkey, and they don't take the steps for success that are necessary. And it's a bad experience for either party. And what I want to communicate to our audience today is that it's sort of a burden to be, not sort of, just a burden to be a person with a disability because, who's working. Because maybe this is just my psychobabble, but in many instances, I've been the first person with a visible disability that they've hired, Steve. And I'm sitting there going, oh, I better not mess this up. Otherwise, they'll never hire somebody with a disability again. Or they gave me this accommodation, so I better not seem like a schnorr, like somebody who always is wanting more, you know, so I have to seem independent and like I don't need that much. And so there are all sorts of impediments to you feeling comfortable at a workplace. For example, I had one person say to me, I really like working with you, Aaron, because I've worked in the field of disability for 30 years, and most people with disabilities I've encountered are militant and angry, but you're diplomatic and you have a great sense of humor. So between not wanting to seem like you need too much help because that'll hurt future opportunities for people with disabilities, and knowing the societal stigma associated with people with disabilities being militant and angry, it's a major issue. But in terms of JF&A, I really have to hand it to the people that the man that hired me, Stephen Klein and William Daroff, and my two amazing supervisors, Elizabeth Cullen and Darcy Hirsch. But I just really feel that it's a focus for JF&A because of the fact that we believe in B'Tselem Elohim, and we believe that disability rights are tzedek, justice, not charity, tzedakah, and it's a demographic imperative with 1 in 4 adults having a disability. And the last point I'll make is another thing that people with disabilities deal with is it's often thought when they're hired that they were hired for PR reasons and not because of their skills. When I first started at JF&A, someone said to me, oh, how nice that William hired somebody with a disability to do his disability advocacy. And I said, I'm sure William wants to diversify his workforce, but he hired me for my credentials.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. So we're starting to get some questions on the Q&A button, I believe, for all of you. So if you have a question, please feel free. We've gotten a number of them, so I'm going to turn it right over to our panelists, and we'll talk about some of these questions. So this one for Jeff. What are some of the most common attitudinal barriers that you encounter in either helping an organization see that it's to their benefit to hire someone with disabilities, or to a hiring manager who may be hesitant?
So I guess I would like to start out by saying, in my experience, this is year 14 for me of doing workforce development for people with disabilities. Still wake up excited every day. I've not run across many employers that are averse to hiring people with disabilities. More often than not, they are open to really diversifying their workforce, and they know very well that they have people with disabilities who work for them, but also they tend to be more sensitive to the fact at times that they have parent advocates on their staffs. So they are open to creating opportunities for people with disabilities. I think if I had to talk about an attitude that's a barrier, at times it's a lack of imagination. It's that ability to really not look at a work environment and really think about how to create inclusion, which we do every day. I've never, for instance, filled a single role at a single employer where I met every bullet on the job description. And I don't expect that to happen in the future. There's always a little bit of stretching that goes on in every position, but really having that imagination that says, okay, here are key activities that need to be done. And here is a person with a disability who can do it. And I think as much as we lament COVID-19 and, you know, I'm a little bit tired of working from home, I think a person with imagination can also really look at it and say, well, we finally realized that the disability community and the independent living community was right. Most of us could work from home and be very productive. And oh my gosh, isn't it more efficient to have staff that are spending an extra 2 hours a day, often working or doing self-care that creates an environment of productivity for themselves instead of being stuck in traffic? So I think this is a great season for us to really open our eyes to the fact that the virtual environment creates a great opportunity for inclusion. So as human service providers, and especially ones focused on justice, as Aaron said, not on charity, maybe that's a question we need to sit with. How are we leveraging the virtual environment to catalyze inclusive employment in our agencies?
Okay, good point. Thank you. And as we all know as well, that there are those who don't have the luxury of working from home. And I think Alicia pointed out that on the manufacturing floor, that's not a virtual environment, and that's for real, in person, with the challenges with COVID and all the other kinds of challenges. But Alicia, while I have your attention, let me probe a little bit on what you shared with us about inspiration and about the budget that you have. Hershey is a large corporation, and it has resources at its disposal that I'm going to venture to say most of the listeners on this call don't have. So help us understand how we can scale the desire to support hiring managers and supervisors to make sure that they are inclusive, to make sure that they do make the accommodation when they don't have the millions and millions of dollars at their disposal.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that all of us can do. And so as individuals, I think there's advocacy. So when we know someone that has a disability, and if they are looking for employment, I love when our employees advocate for folks that they know. And so that goes a long way. You know, we joined with the National Organization on Disability as a founding member in the Look Closer campaign to really highlight the 20 million Americans with disabilities who are also unemployed. And we believe there's a lot of work to go around. And so getting connected to people who are looking for work is something I think everyone can help with. I think, you know, once you are in an organization, this accommodations process, I think for us has been really key. And I think another thing that many businesses and orgs can do is just to have a frequent communications schedule. So we celebrate many Heritage and History Months, you know, every year at the company. And of course, we celebrate disability awareness in October. But at the start of COVID last year, we started having very frequent conversations with our employees, and our senior leadership team would talk with all employees, sometimes as often as every 2 weeks. And our Abilities First employee affinity group said, you know what, we're all trying to manage 10 different things at once if we are working from home. And the ability to leverage closed captioning in our technology is really key. And it's not just key for individuals who have a disability, but it can be key for everyone. You know, if I'm trying to attend to 150 people while I'm doing a video call, being able to see what's on the screen is really helpful. The same as if I'm attending to a child who has a question about a lesson on their Zoom call, right? And so we started talking about the technology capabilities that we have available, and we made sure to make those known to all employees around the world. So I think a real steady communications channel and series of events can be really helpful. And I also think that organizations can continue to provide.
People keep testing me.
One thing that we did 2 years ago during Abilities Awareness Month was that we provided some virtual reality simulation headsets that allowed employees to really understand what it's like to have a visual or an auditory impairment. And I think anytime we can increase empathy, that goes such a long way to understanding and creates new pathways for people to connect. So those are 3 things that I would share that I think are open to many organizations.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. And you know, when you're not putting together a conference and sessions in a conference, you're a legislative lobbyist. What next? What should we be watching for from a policy perspective? I mentioned earlier that it's been 30 years since the ADA. What's on the horizon? What are the things that JF&A is lobbying for, and how can each of us help?
Thank you for asking, Steve, and Alicia, that was terrific. Well, first of all, I just want to get back to what I meant to mention earlier, which is that in my one evaluation I received from a supervisor, they dinged me for not telling them the full extent of my disability. And I told the person, I said, sir, I'm very sorry about that, but I was afraid that you would rescind my offer if you knew the full extent of my disability. So I get a lot of calls from federations about people with disabilities not disclosing, but it's because of that fear. Now, to get to your question, my colleague Darcy Hirsch and I have an ambitious policy agenda related to the reconciliation package, the stimulus package that's going through. We want to increase the maximum SNAP benefit by 15% because 25% of those with disabilities, 25% of SNAP recipients rather, are people with disabilities. And we want to increase the federal contribution to Medicaid, but in what's called an FMAP increase, both the HCBS level and home and community-based services like the people that shower and shave and dress my brother at the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes, and also just generally for home and community-based services. We are also pushing very hard for the Able Age Adjustment Act. I don't know if for your children, Steve, you had a college savings plan for them, but the Able Age Adjustment Act is like that because in 2014, the ABLE Act passed, which allowed people with disabilities to save for disability-related expenses like therapies, medications, durable medical equipment, and without losing their SSI and Medicaid benefits, which is critical for people with disabilities. But it said you had to have your age of onset of disability prior to your 26th birthday. And that left out about 8 million people who acquire disabilities later in life. So we're trying, Darcy and I, and the many people on this call are trying to end that inequity.
Thank you. Jeff, I got a question from a listener. What tips do you have in opening employment opportunities for job seekers with disabilities within the nonprofit sector? So exactly the opposite of what Alicia has been sharing. Let's talk a little bit more about the nonprofit sector and the organizations you work with. So I think this person is saying often nonprofit hiring managers voice that each staff has to wear so many hats that job carving or job sharing, I guess, is not an option. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is focusing on, but perhaps we can tighten it up a little bit and say, you know, what advice do you have to nonprofits to A, pay more attention to the issue, B, to be more open to the hiring of those with disabilities, and I guess C, making it happen?
So economics are real. I'm very aware of that, having been in nonprofits for a number of years of varying sizes from 1 million to closer to 20 million. I think one of the really most practical and data-driven responses that I could give is work with high school students with disabilities and get them in internships and paid jobs early. So invite them to fulfill roles in your nonprofit or in your company while they're within that transition window from 14 to 22, because we know that two things really work with catalyzing employment for individuals with disabilities during their high school years. One is parental expectations. Nothing beats parental expectations. And two is paid employment before people with disabilities at high school. Inclusion tells us that that's true for all individuals. But when we're talking about a population where, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, depending on the numbers you look at, about 23 to 33% of American adults with disabilities are engaged in the workforce. We know that one of the keys is really getting people working young. So if you don't have enough money to carve a job in a nonprofit, a disability advocacy nonprofit in Washington State of 8 people, well, you can work with young adults with disabilities who are realizing that disability is a part of their identity and not an impediment at 16 and 17, and have them as a part of your advocacy team building their skills. So it will alter their college trajectory and really alter their career. On the less practical and just more ideological side, as people who are committed to justice and as nonprofit providers, we just need to find our way to yes. We just need to make it work, which we've seen all of the adaptations that we've made over the last 11 or 12 months. We need to commit to hiring people with disabilities. Our postings need to say people with disabilities strongly encouraged to apply. And there are many other policy initiatives that I think Aaron and his team would work on. One of the questions I've always had is, you know, we diversified the labor force in this country, not only through affirmative actions, but by really driving affirmative action through the largest employer in every state, which is local and state and federal government. Why have we not done that for people with disabilities? Seems kind of like low-hanging fruit for me. But let's just get it done one way or the other. And I'm so glad people are interested in diversifying their workforce, and I'm so glad that people showed up today to talk about this.
Great.
Steve, can I add something very briefly?
Please.
I think we as human beings are good at coming up with rationales for things that make us uncomfortable or that we don't want to do. So people are very creative, and you can come up with a million rationales that about why you can't possibly hire that person with a disability. But know that that is coming from your biases and that you should work on that. I think if there's a will, there's a way. How many times in my life have I been told, oh, he won't be able to do this, he won't be able to do that? Well, I didn't pay much attention. And because of the support of my parents, I have been successful. The phone always goes off at terrible times. I guess you hope you enjoyed the music.
That might have been your parents.
What'd you say?
I said that might have been your parents checking on you.
I
Steve,
don't
that's
think so.
what texting and not answering the phone was created for.
Go ahead, Aaron.
So I just think this speaks to an attitudinal barrier, briefly, that if someone has Jeff's attitude, they can make it work. But it's easier to just say no. But we need to move beyond that thinking and start thinking of ways to get to yes, as Jeff was saying. Because if you say yes, you will find that people with disabilities are excellent employees. For example, I love my job so much that I had a week of vacation that I didn't take because I love my job and there was so much to do. So I think if you get beyond your fear, you'll be glad you did.
Okay, thank you. Alicia.
Steve, can I just tag one quick thing? So Alicia was talking so much about the employee research group at Hershey that has driven a lot of inclusion, and October is Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is really, really important. Something that I was thinking about this morning as I was preparing is, what if we had a coming out day during October for all of us like me who have ADHD? And we said, okay, I have ADHD and I'm medicated for depression, both true, by the way. And let people come out and really feel confident and say, these are my disabilities. These are parts of my identity, not impediments. I think that would really help us move towards a different mindset, which is a big part of what we need to make happen, is a mindset shift.
Thank you. Alicia, I have two questions for you. One is easy and one is hard.
Okay.
So here's the easy one. Let me just read it. Yeah. Should employers ask during a job interview if the potential candidate will need special accommodations? Is this appropriate? Is it legal?
So, great question. I think it's important to have a dialogue with everything. And so I think understanding if accommodations are needed is a really healthy conversation. And I think that there are many ways to get people in the workforce. And so that's why we have a lot of conversation, and we do ask pretty early in the process if accommodations are needed. And it's not a knockout. It's a simple way of ensuring that we're providing the most welcoming environment and that there's going to be a good fit with the job. And it lets us know if we need to do any reasonable tailoring for that job. So I think the answer is yes, we should be having those conversations.
So it's not a legal issue. It's not it doesn't lead to some sort of, if the person doesn't get the job, it's a discrimination action against the employer. So that's why I think the person was asking, hey, can I be open but not be discriminatory?
Yeah, I think you can be open, and I don't think that employers should be concerned about that. I think it's more important to have a really honest conversation, right? And it's important to understand what the job entails and how individuals can get that work done, right?
Okay, thank you. So here's the hard one. That was the easy question. Here's the hard one. These days, it seems that much of the conversation about diversity and inclusion is centered around race. Mm-hmm. And there's a good reason for that. And systemic racism continues to be a problem. Yeah. This person writes that leaves people with disabilities struggling for a place at the table. In other words, this person is expressing a sense of being left out in the diversity and inclusion conversation. Mm-hmm. How do you respond?
Yeah, that's a really, really important observation. I'm glad that that person raised that. We've been talking a lot at Hershey in the last year or so about equity, right? About this concept of ensuring that everyone has what they need to be able to compete and to be successful. And so that conversation means that you have to get really nuanced and look at the needs of different populations. And so I think many organizations are focused on this topic of racial equity, but also many different kinds of equity, right? I know our definition of diversity literally has 20 different phrases in it. So there's many things that we consider that would make an individual diverse beyond race, ethnicity, national origin, and those kinds of things. And I think where I see this conversation is going more around mental ability and impact and thinking styles. And in this last year of pandemic, I know that so many more people have been struggling with well-being and mental health. And I think that's a new burgeoning area within the area of disability. I can say from our employee census, it was one of the top 2 things on the minds of employees is mental well-being and trying to deal with taking care of yourself, taking care of those you love, and doing a good job at work. And I really think that topic is a new forefront in this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we've always got to be really honest and open about the impact of systemic racism, particularly in America. There are things that impact everybody throughout your daily life because of that. And I think we have to be really open about that. But I don't think that that's the only conversation on the table, right? And so I think that, this topic of disability is one that it's an umbrella kind of a scenario. It covers everyone. And I think right now we're focused a lot on continuing to demonstrate care and well-being for all of our employees because many people are going through things right now.
Thank you. I love this give and take of this Q&A because someone has just offered an opinion and I can't vouch for the legality of it, but the person said, federal contractors have to ask about disability status of applicants. For other employers, you cannot ask about disability per se at the interview stage, but you can talk about job duties and whether the person can do them with or without accommodation. Again, if you're in a position of hiring, I would urge that you check with HR and or legal counsel, but that was a helpful observation from one of our listeners. I'm gonna answer a question that seemed to have been directed to me, and then I'm gonna quickly go around the horn with one last question for each of our panelists. So this one asked, at the beginning, the panel moderator, that would be me, gave thanks to those employers for overlooking his disability. Where and how did this make sense when we must be very much aware of the disability of a potential hire or coworker when considering how to make a workplace more accessible and make sure the coworkers are well educated and so forth? So let me just clarify what I said. What I said was that despite the fact that I had a disability, and despite the fact that we never talked about it in the interview process because they weren't allowed to ask about it. And I used to have a lot of fun in the interview process. I used to say, now let me talk about my hearing loss since you were not allowed to ask me. And that kind of broke the ice and that was fine. But what I meant was that despite the fact that it was clear that I wear hearing aids, they overlooked that. And they hired me for my skills, for the opportunity to lead a community. And so when I say overlook, I don't mean ignore. What I meant is make sure you see what that person has to offer. Make sure you focus on the ability, not the disability. All right, so let me see if I can go around the horn and ask the one question that will hopefully help us wrap it up because I am conscious of time. For each of our panelists, we'll start with Jeff, and then we'll go to Alicia, and then we'll go to Ann. What's the one thing that people in the audience can do right now to make a difference in their organizations on this issue. One thing. Go ahead, Jeff.
Expect that people with disability are going to succeed in your workforce, and start them working during high school so that they have real employment experiences before they exit high school.
Alicia?
Advocate for individuals with disabilities. As an individual, look to get them connected to hiring opportunities. And when you're working with them, make sure that you stand up for them and advocate for them.
Thank you.
My thinking, Steve, is this. I think the people on the call should be pushing their hiring managers and their HR departments to hire people with disabilities. And I also just wanted to add one quick thing about what Alicia said about systemic racism. She's absolutely right. But what people often forget is that people with disabilities are part of multiple marginalized groups in some instances. For example, communities of color or the LGBTQ plus community. But I think that in order to get more people with disabilities hired, there has to be pressure, polite pressure put on hiring managers and HR professionals. And I hope that in 5 years, hiring of people with disabilities is so commonplace that we don't have to have a session like this.
Amen. So first of all, I want to thank each and every one of our panelists. We really appreciate your time, your wisdom, your being with us to help clarify this important issue. You know, I joked earlier about this. Hopefully, you know, this would be a 7-hour session. Maybe not 7, but I do wish we had more time. And I do wish we were able to interact with the audience a little bit more and answer more of the questions. But in any case, I just want to express my appreciation to everyone for tuning in, for being a part of this, this webinar. We've heard lots of advice. We've heard encouraging words and very specific action that we can all take. Jeff says, you know, hire early and often. Get younger people involved and integrated into the workforce so that it makes it easier for those with disabilities later on to say, look, I have experience, I've been there, I've done that. Alicia said to advocate, both inside the workplace and outside. Make your voice known. Don't just say, you know what, it would be nice if, but ask, why not? Why aren't we here at XYZ organization doing more, and what can we do to get going? And that was echoed by Aaron, who said to directly advocate with the leadership, the CEO of your organization, the hiring manager, the HR department, to look around. And by the way, just want to underscore, I mentioned it earlier, not all disabilities are visible. And to be aware of that is important, and to make accommodations as necessary. So there's a host of disabilities that are not clearly visible, but are challenging for those individuals. And we as employers, as Jewish organizations, we owe it to them to do everything we can to not only include, but to welcome. I want to urge everyone to take a look at the JDAM website, and there is a respectability networking event tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern time. I don't know more detail, but I would imagine that'll be on the website. So I encourage you to take a look at that. For the record, it is 12:58 p.m. here on the East Coast. So we are starting and ending on time. And with that, I thank you all very, very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's been such an honor, Steve. Thank you so much. And it's been a joy to be with such accomplished, talented individuals this hour.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. Get out there and hire.
Thank you, Jeff.